Okay, so welcome to Challenging Leadership. My name is Stephen Mather. It's great to have you with us today. And we've also got...
Hey there, I'm Jared Scott.
Brilliant. So Jared, it's your topic today, something you wanted to talk about. So do you want to introduce it for us?
Sure, I'd love to. I was thinking about, when it comes to leadership, balancing authority and empowerment is critical. It seems like leadership always has a tendency to go one way or the other. Like you have leaders that maybe micromanage, and then you have ones that are super empowering, and those extremes can actually not be so good. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about how we
Yeah,
can balance it out and look at the strengths and weaknesses of both of those.
sounds good. Sounds good. Right. Okay, where do you want to start then?
Well, I was thinking about that. Let's talk about the positives. I like to start at positive because boy,
Okay.
there's going to be some negative things I think that we can delve into. But one of the things that I was thinking about is I try to look at an illustration, and so I'm sure over there you have walking paths or nature trails that you can take.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we have one here. It was an old rail line, and they discontinued the rail service and they paved over it, and it's about, I don't know, 30 miles long now. And but it's very clear, and you can't get lost. I mean, it take a great deal of effort because it's very obvious what the path is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it made me think about that. That's maybe where we start with. When you're directing people, when you're leading people, there needs to be a clear path. It needs to be identified with signage, clear communication. But I could walk on that path. I could run on the path. I can even take my bike on the path. So there's different ways that you can traverse from point A to point B, and yet you're staying on the path. And so one of the first things I thought about is, if you're going to balance authority and empowerment, then you need to really initially set clear expectations. You gotta tell people what you want them to do, and the thing that I think is important is that everybody needs different types of signage. Some people, if you give them an open range to travel on, they're going to panic. You have to get down to, I need you to walk on this path. Otherwise they'll just stand there like, I don't know what to do. Whereas others, you can say, I need you to get to this town, and okay, no problem, and they'll make their way. So that's just something that I thought about when it came to this. Is initially you have to set clear expectations for those that you're leading.
Okay, cool. So what do you think about, so just taking a step back, I suppose,
Yeah.
thinking about what we mean here. So the most well-known model that sort of talks about this is Kurt Lewin's famous model where he talks about autocratic managers or leaders, laissez-faire leaders, or
Hmm.
sometimes called abdocratic or highly delegative, and then you've got a middle zone there, which sometimes called democratic, sometimes called participative. So do you sort of subscribe to that way of thinking, or not? What's your thoughts on that?
Um, I mean, I think that it's a great place to start, but then you have to look at, what are you leading? What I think that each of those types of leadership ways are good based on what you're leading or who you're leading.
Yeah.
You gotta match it up. Like if you're very high up the chain of leadership, then perhaps the way would vary versus somebody who's maybe leading a very small group of individuals.
Mm, yeah. So it's
So
situational in your view.
yeah, I mean, I'm very situational though in my thinking. So I
Yeah.
try to be very flexible and not. I don't think that a hammer fixes every problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree. So, I mean, when I'm training managers in this topic, I tend to, it's easier to understand the extremes, isn't it? So you sort of look at a list of characteristics, let's say, in an extreme autocrat. And these would be, everything's got to be done their way, micromanaging, often quite aggressive as a sort of behavior, set of behaviors.
Mhm.
the team don't really have any freedom to make decisions. It's all kind of down to what the manager wants. So
Mhm.
that would be an extreme autocrat, I would suggest. And then the extreme laissez-faire sort of leader is, they just let things drift and just let people do what they want, essentially, and nobody really takes any decisions. Well, eventually, I guess the workforce have to make some decisions, but they don't really know what they're doing, and then they
Yeah.
end up getting in trouble and passing the buck and all of that. So that's the extreme laissez-faire, and then I think there's a zone in the middle that I try to encourage um, my learners to think about as the kind of useful zone. Whether we call that democratic or participative, it doesn't really matter. But there's a zone there that we can operate in, and depending on the situation will depend on which sort of end we're going to operate in that zone. So sometimes if we've got a very new team, no one really knows what they're doing, it's a new project or something, then there's quite a lot of direction that needs to be given, clear signage, to use your illustration, and very clear goals. This is where we're getting to, this is the vision, these are our desired outcomes, and there's very clear route to how to get there. Whereas once a team's developed a bit more and people know what they're doing, and you've got more trust in the individuals, then I think you can step off a little bit and let people make more decisions, and that leads to a more dynamic, more flexible, and ultimately a better team. But yeah, it is, as they say. I don't know whether you have this saying in the States, but horses for courses. I don't know whether
That's
you
a
have
new one
that.
for me, but maybe
Okay,
someone heard it.
so it's a horse racing analogy. So different horses perform better on different sorts of ground. So if it's a very heavy sort of ground, then you need a certain type of horse to run that. Whereas other grounds, other conditions might be much more suited to another type of beast. And so I think that's again, it's situational, really. It's so that's my general thoughts around it, I think.
Sure. Oh, well, I appreciate that, and, now I'm gonna use that illustration. I like that. That's good. I guess that explains why the, Triple Crown winner is so impressive because it runs on 3 different
Yeah.
tracks that have a
Mm.
different style to them, and,
Yeah.
so maybe that's what they're the one size fits all
The
leadership.
all rounder, yeah. I mean, I think an all rounder is really useful in any sport, but
Mhm.
or in any discipline. But yeah, you probably need some specialisms as well. So yeah, there's probably times when it's better suited to your style, depending on what situation you find yourself in. Yeah,
So true. So true.
I guess as it's called challenging leadership, I like to take on that role of challenging everything.
Yeah, hey,
So
good. Let's do it.
I, I, I guess um, I'm gonna challenge. Not I don't disagree with anything you said, actually, Jared. I think you're
But it's
absolutely right.
okay if you do.
But yeah, I know.
I'm
But I
having my
think,
coffee, so
yeah, go on, chill out and have your coffee. Yeah, I think sometimes I think we do as managers. I think we can slip into um, a sort of degree of control freakery that is perhaps not necessarily all warranted.
Mm,
And I think managers tend to err on the side of more rather than less control.
mhm,
And I think sometimes that can get in the way of other things that we want from our team.
mhm,
And there's quite a lot of theory around um, empowerment and feelings of autonomy and its relationship to motivation.
mhm.
So I don't know if you're interested. I can sort of throw some of these at you and
Well,
see
I'd
what you
love
think.
to because I actually have a couple of real life examples related to
Great,
that. So
great.
you
Okay,
do that, and I might have something that says, "Well, this is actually what happened."
right. Yeah, yeah. This is the real
Sweet.
world, Steve.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the I suppose when you're thinking about empowerment, I think the whole point of empowerment is the reason why a manager might want to have that sense within their team is because it increases a sense of motivation. It means that the feelings of wanting to work hard, wanting to get a good result is coming from within.
Mm-hmm.
So this is known as intrinsic motivation in psychological terms. And there's quite a lot of research into what creates a sense of intrinsic motivation. One of my favourites is a theory by Deci and Ryan. So it's definitely worth looking this up if people are interested. I'll see if I
Mm-hmm.
can pop a little link in for a paper that's accessible. But they've done a lot of work on the idea that we all have basic psychological needs. And if in the workplace, if we can create a condition where people are able to meet those basic psychological needs, then people are more motivated. So this
Mm-hmm.
is one way of thinking about motivation. It's saying, actually, the way we motivate people is by creating the environment where people's intrinsic motivators are met, these basic needs. And the basic needs are autonomy, competence, and a feeling of relatedness.
Mm-hmm.
So according to Deci and Ryan, these are basically the three things that people need, particularly in the workplace. They need a sense of autonomy. So that very much relates to this question of empowerment. They also need a feeling of competence, that they know what they're doing, they can do it, and that they're getting feedback that shows that they actually have got some competence in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And relatedness, obviously, is the social element. So feeling that they're part of something, part of their team. They've got people that value them, and they value their friendships and relationships with their co-workers. But also maybe feel connected to something bigger. So the business itself, or the mission of the business, might be part of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to this autonomy thing, this is the one that's often perhaps the most difficult, because clearly complete autonomy is probably quite problematic, really. We can't say to everybody in the team, just kind of do what you want, guys. That's not going to work. So there's always a balance there, I think, and it's trying to find that balance, which is the tricky one. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's the motivation model. I don't know whether you've come across anything like that. I mean, it's a lot of common sense in many respects, but it's this idea that motivation is coming from these intrinsic
Mm-hmm.
needs being fulfilled.
It,
You
it,
know,
it makes sense what you're saying, and I agree with that. Actually, that's how I like to
yeah.
lead. But I am in the position where I lead a small group of people, and I was thinking about what happens when you have a large group, and it made me think about Google. Several years ago, they said, "Hey, we're going to do this 20% your time policy," and
Okay.
what they said is basically, "Hey, 20% of the work week, you can do whatever you want." Work on whatever project you want. And basically we're trying to foster creativity and innovation. I mean, you
Mm.
picture, I don't know, the stereotype, you got all these people riding around on skateboards and, and
Yes. Playing
Coca-Cola in their
foosball.
hand and,
Yeah.
hey, let's
Yeah. Yeah.
go
Yeah.
get some
Yeah.
candy and chat about it a little bit. And they try to do that, but over time, it actually led to less accountability and decrease in overall productivity. Like people got lost in the weeds
Mm.
because I don't. Some people are scared to death when you give them too much freedom, and then others they embrace it. I mean, I think about me personally. I love being given autonomy to just get the job done. I love to use my creativity. If I'm in a box and I'm constrained, it just kills me. Like that's just me as a person in general.
Mm.
But in this case, I'm sure they were thinking maybe from their perspective on what they liked, whoever made these decisions. But when you've got thousands of employees,
Mm.
just having a general policy for everyone, that could be problematic. So, um,
Yeah. Again, I think the situational nature of this is really important. So I guess it depends on the job to some degree.
mhm,
So if you're, I don't know, highly creative role, where you're expected to come up with new ideas constantly, then you need, I would suggest, you need that freedom to
sure.
explore things, and some of them will go nowhere. But
Mhm,
it's just part of the process. It's a bit different if you're, I don't know, working on a very specific project with a specific end in mind.
yeah,
Maybe that's a bit different. So
sure.
yeah, I guess it is. Again, it's that situational element of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But have you ever heard of a company called Zappos? They
Don't think
they're
so.
basically a shoe company. I
Okay.
love them. I could go and look at a pair of shoes online, and they'll deliver them to my doorstep tomorrow. And they come with a shipping label. Hey, if it doesn't fit, you don't like them, you just slap the label back on the box and drop it off at your local postal area, and
Right.
then you know, again,
Yeah.
it's been successful. I think it works underneath the Amazon umbrella now,
Okay. Yeah.
but they actually I don't know if you've ever heard this term, holacracy, a whole nother
Okay.
way of looking at things. But that was the approach that they went with, and it was basically distributing authority and decision making throughout the entire company.
Hmm.
So from the smallest role all the way up the chain, everybody had some measure of authority to make decisions, and the intent was to empower employees basically to take ownership of their work,
Hmm.
which is honestly what we want, right?
Yeah.
Ownership and accountability is so important for the success of any organization, but um, some people didn't like it. They grappled with the idea of, well, where does the line stop where I have authority and someone else now needs to take over? And other people like, I don't want any authority. I just want to be told what to do.
Hmm.
So ultimately, they decided to shift away from that as well. So I just, that those are probably two situations where they tried it and it did not work. But
Hmm.
I just saw that phrase and I was like, I've never heard of that before. Holacracy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've come across that. I mean, yeah, I think, I suppose again, just thinking about challenging that for a moment, I think it's easy to, because the most common way of managing is to have a very hierarchical structure.
Hmm.
It's become in business, we don't we don't think it could be another way. We just assume there is there's a senior leadership team, and then there's another level below that, and everybody reports into each other, and it's this very hierarchical system. And I was talking to, I think I've mentioned this academic already on this podcast, but Professor Dennis
Hmm.
Tourish. I've interviewed him for a different podcast, and I mean, he's quite radical in his thinking, and he makes the point that in other areas of life we've accepted that actually that isn't the best way of operating. So in politics or in lots of other areas of life, we might have hierarchies, but we don't necessarily have the same sorts of power structures as we do in the workplace. And so I guess he's trying to challenge those assumptions. And whenever you have a business that tries something different, they stand out like a sore thumb and are obvious then. And so everybody's waiting for them to fail. The
Yeah.
reality is that out of, millions of businesses throughout the world, most are doing it I guess, the old fashioned way, the most common way. And you'll see loads and loads of examples of poor leadership and poor employee relations, poor levels of motivation and empowerment and all of that. So, yeah, it's hard. I think we don't have the research, as far as I'm aware, that's able, because we probably don't have enough of a pool of examples to be able to see actually which of these work well and which don't. I mean, I suppose I'm. It reminds me a bit around the debate that's been going on for years around home working. Working from home.
Mhm.
So if we go back 10 years, it was generally considered that if people are allowed to work from home or flexi time even at home, then people will just take advantage, and they'll do less work, they'll get distracted, and they won't you know basically it'll be a cost. I think the evidence was for quite some time that, again, depending on the role, and this is why it's really hard because you can't generalize, but depending on the role, there has been a lot of evidence for quite a long time that give people the opportunity to work from home and have some control over their hours. Actually, you get more from them. You get more hours, you get better quality work. Um, and yeah, okay, there will be some distractions, but there's distractions at work as well.
Sure.
And actually, nowadays, it's, I wouldn't say the argument's been won, because there's still some dinosaurs who want everybody back in the office,
Yeah.
clocking in. But I think, again, depending on the role, for office sorts of jobs where you're sat in front of a computer for most of the time, or you're on the phone, you're talking to people over Zoom, or you're on the old-fashioned phone, then yeah, I think that argument's almost been won, that actually, yeah, working from home can be at least just as good.
Hmm.
There is opportunity for abuse, but that doesn't mean that majority of people are gonna do that. So
Sure.
yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one. Um, yeah, I'll stop talking now. I'll
No,
let you
no, it's
respond to
okay.
that.
I mean, you definitely hit a spot with me with that because until we had the COVID situation,
Yeah,
I think we just like let's just carry on like we've always
that's
done.
right.
And we've even found technology forced upon us showed us that we don't have to spend time on airplanes or
Yeah,
traveling
absolutely.
everywhere. I do a lot of traveling with my role, and it's like so many times you can do just as good of a job just doing like you and I are talking from
Yeah,
across the pond, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like we're in the
absolutely.
same room together.
Yeah.
And it's just again having that balanced viewpoint. But I was thinking too, you're like it's so hard to find examples that well how do we prove it out that it's actually happened? Because the tendency is we can have 100 times trying something and everybody focuses on that one negative time it didn't work out, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh, it was terrible. It's rubbish, if I may
yeah.
use that word. and
I
and
love the way you slip these English words in, these Anglo.
I'm trying, I'm trying to find, common ground with you, Stephen. No, but no, it's interesting because uh, the other example, actually, I'm going to do a positive example. You probably heard about Toyota and Kaizen,
Hmm.
yeah,
Course, yeah.
and their incremental changes
Mhm.
that they
Yeah.
they did. So I think that's where if you're going to change how you lead and you're going
Mm.
to adapt to the times, doing so incrementally allows you to be able to always make sure you're not deviating too far from where you're trying to go. So
Mm.
that's an example of success because they continue to influence culture by how they do things, and they've been oftentimes copied by many other automotive manufacturers.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. Actually, a lot of these experiments are very brave in terms of how we're going to radically change the way we do things, and maybe that's actually part of the problem is that
Yeah.
it takes a while for people's behaviours to sort of adapt to these new ways of doing things, and actually they'd be better just doing these incremental, step by step, continuous improvement type approaches, as opposed to right, from now on we're just going to let people work from home without any without any direction. And I think it's true that that we also do need, I think we all need some feeling of support. So on the one hand, you can see direction as an imposition upon you. I'm being told what I have to do. But on the other hand, there's an element of supportiveness there. That if I'm left to my own devices, I don't. I feel like I'm a bit lost, and I do need some direction. I think we all need that. I mean, I'm a very autonomous person. I'm
Yeah.
lucky enough to be able to work for myself.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things I really do miss is a bit of from time to time a bit of direction.
Yeah, sure. I agree with you. Made me think about like if we're gonna talk about empowerment, what are some things you should do if you're trying to empower? And
Yeah, it's a good idea.
it made me think about you did this little snippet this week, I believe, about a short pencil.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you can maybe I'll let you explain that a little bit if anybody hasn't had
Okay.
an opportunity to do
Yeah,
that.
so I just did a little. I think I just did it on our Instagram page actually. So
Yeah.
I was doing the. I've got a course that I run. It's a 3-day program. It's a program I developed over the years, and it's pretty much the same every time. But obviously, we adapt it to some degree. But one of the exercises is it's like a manufacturing simulation. In fact, it's a mini manufacturing plant. So it actually makes something at the end of it, and part of it is that they have to use pencils to color in something, and then they use that to do something else. Um, and obviously, the first round, we want to make sure that they have plenty of things that they can improve on, because it's really around continuous improvement. It's a sort of Kaizen day that we're doing. So the first round of this exercise, I give them equipment that isn't really very good. It's not up to much. And one of the things that we do is basically make sure that all the pencils they've got are tiny, tiny, weeny little bits of stubby pencil left that are blunt, so I get my scissors and I cut the end off them. So they have to then sharpen them before they start, and they're too small to be able to operate properly. And what is interesting is that most people, in fact, I don't think I've ever had a group, and I've been doing this for about 10 years. I don't think I've ever had a group say, Steve, we can't do this task because we haven't got the equipment that we need to do it. They just put up with it and they do the best they can with the terrible equipment I've given them.
Yes.
And on the one hand, I always feel a little surge of pride in my fellow workers that they will try. This is manufacturing people, and I think manufacturing people are generally, a real can-do attitude, and they'll do their best. So there's a little bit of pride there in them. But on the other hand, there's an element of, why are they putting up with that? Why are they not challenging me and saying, actually, we could do this a lot better if we had some decent equipment, Steve? And I think that's quite interesting. So I just talked about that briefly on our Instagram page. If you're not using that, by the way, listeners, check us out on Leadership Pod Instagram. That's the example. Yeah.
Well, I love the example because what it shows to me is if you're going to empower people, maybe in a little bit of a different direction on the take on your illustration, it's like you have to give people the training, the tools, and the resources in order to succeed.
Yeah.
It's like, and so it's like if you try to empower somebody and you give them that short, stubby pencil,
Yeah.
it's like that can be demotivating. Like, why do I don't want this authority here, take it back because you've made it more difficult on them. It's not that leading is not challenging, but we shouldn't create challenges by improper tooling or improper resources or not enough training. And that's where I think it can fall on its face is, well, hey, I gave you the authority to do this. Yeah, you did. And you didn't give me any support. You didn't give me any help with this. So I think that's so important.
That's absolutely right. And I suppose also it's that space, that psychological space to be able to question and ask questions, even challenge. I still think clearly a leader, because they've got the responsibility, they're being paid to make those decisions, and they are answerable for those decisions. So I do believe that they should be given respect by the followers, by the workforce, to do their best to do what they're asked to do. I try to do that if I'm when I've got a leader. So it's not that I want anarchy in the workplace. So I do think it's important to follow those instructions. However, I think it's also important to give people the space to be able to say, I just want to can I just challenge this? Can I actually talk about this? Because I've got a problem with this. And then you can have an adult to adult conversation about it. And, you either change your mind or you don't. But yeah, I think it's important to have that ability to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's so important. And I was thinking, it's like there's so many pieces of this puzzle that have to be put together in order for this to actually work when you're empowering individuals. Because well, I'm going to cite another example. My first time working where I work at now, I was in production, and I remember the tool that I was supposed to use to put together this component was not working. It was broken, and here I am, this young kid, and I'm like, went up to my supervisor. He was ex-military, and he was super rigid, stoic maybe
Right.
is a better. But he's like, well, you just need to improvise, and I'm like, he may have dropped in a few other words in there. We'll keep our podcast rated PG.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm looking, I'm like, I don't know what that means because it was just, it's a very systematic way to approach things. But then what that did for me personally, I was like, well, I'm just not going to bring up anything to him again because I didn't want to get chided for bringing up a real problem. And so when people come to you, if you are in a leadership role, if they come to you with a problem, even if you already know what the solution is going to be, or you feel like, well, that's insignificant, I don't think you should ever downplay them bringing it to your attention because they're coming to you from their perspective. that they obviously are stuck or they're having an issue. So that ability to allow people to give feedback, even if it's not positive, and us accepting it as a leader sets a good example for more continual feedback, because you have to have that feedback loop. Feedback can't go one way, otherwise it's not really feedback.
Absolutely. So I totally agree with that, Jared. And there's another model that I use with my learners that I think I found quite useful. And we mentioned delegation in a previous episode, and I think this kind of relates to that a little bit. There's a model that's was developed quite a few years ago by two guys called Tannenbaum and Schmidt, and it's a sort of way of thinking about delegation and the amount of freedom you give to your team members versus the amount of authority that you're using. And I find it really, really useful because one of the problems that managers have with delegation, I think we mentioned this last time, is that there's a fear of losing control. And clearly, if somebody does the job poorly, then if it's our responsibility, then we carry the can for that. So that's a reason why people don't always delegate. But I try to make the point that it's not a binary thing. So delegation isn't that you either give everything or give somebody the task and everything with it, or nothing at all. You can still delegate. You can give people a task or a goal, but still retain some of the checks and balances. So you can say, I want you to lead this particular project, or I want you to do this thing that I would normally do. Here's how I'd like you to do it. So that's one level of delegation. Or you can say, I'd like you to do this thing and I'd like you to come up with the ways of doing it. Talk to me about it first, and then off you go and have a go. Or you can say, here's the thing I'd like you to do. It's up to you how you go about doing it because I trust you. Or you can just say, here's the job. Let me know when you've done it. So there's actually 10 levels in this thing, but they're all sort of similar to that. So it's like you can operate at whatever level is appropriate, and the appropriateness of that level will be determined by the individual. How experienced are they? How much do they know? What's their skill levels? Also, how much you trust them. Also, the importance of the job itself. So if it goes wrong, it's disastrous. Then clearly you want a bit more control over it. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it. You don't have to take everything in the same way. Some tasks, some people, some situations you'll give greater freedom, greater autonomy, and then others you'll keep a bit more control. So again, it's that very flexible situational approach I think is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. I guess maybe different people need different variances of markers along the trail. You
Yeah.
know, if you got someone who's a hiker, they don't get lost. They're like, hey, I know where I'm going. I need you to tell me where I need to get to, right? And then other
Yeah.
people need a marker every stone's throw. So
Absolutely. And for the person that likes to find a route or likes to explore and so on, then finding safe ways, again, using the word safe is important, but finding safe ways to give them a little bit of freedom, or even quite a bit of freedom to make some choices, to find better ways of doing it, can be really empowering. It's really powerful, but not everybody will appreciate, or will it be
sure.
safe to do that. So yeah, again, it's very much about the individual and the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there's any danger with too much empowerment can burn people out, or actually have the absolute opposite effect on them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's one of the risks actually in the flattening out of management structures that's happened over the last sort of 10, 20 years that I've noticed in industry. We've constantly trying to cut costs, removing middle tiers of management, has been very much a trend. And part of that is to cut costs, but also I think the thinking behind it was to try and push the decision making down to people who are closer to the sharp end, to the actual job itself.
Hmm.
Um, so you have first line managers now, I think, having a lot more responsibility than they ever used to. There used to
Yes.
be a kind of charge hand role where they'd just be in charge of tasks, but that role is now normally it comes with some more responsibility, uh, perhaps doing even things like performance reviews or return to work
Mhm.
processes and things like that, disciplinary procedures and performance management. Um, and I think sometimes that's really unfair to those very young, often really on the first step of the management ladder. Often they've had no formal training. They've been
Mhm.
given this role of being team leader or whatever because they were good at their job. They were good at the
Mhm.
physical job. And so the manager says, "Oh, he's good or she's good.
Yep.
Let's give them a different job."
Yeah. Yeah.
They're good at that one. Let's give them a different one, which is
That's
more
right.
difficult, and we're not going to train them for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's right. Yeah, too much autonomy, too much responsibility without the requisite training or support. Yeah, absolutely, that's dangerous.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the flattening out because definitely uh, we see that trend even in the U.S. And I think that the desired effect to try to cut costs or save money, it may look like that on the surface, but it creates a lot of other issues that are underlying. I think about I've held off, but I have to give you a food illustration. I know I tried, but one of my favorite places to go have breakfast is this place called Waffle House,
Okay.
and I hope I don't lose any listeners over this because there's very strong opinions about whether you like Waffle House or not in the U.S. But it's
Okay.
just a hole in the wall diner, and they
Right.
cook right in front of you, right? So you're sitting
Okay.
there, and the way that they work is usually they have they call it a floor manager, and they're the ones that's making sure everybody's doing their job, right? Well, if you flattened it out and you said, all right, now the manager is also responsible for cooking the food, they all of a sudden have lost their ability to
Mm.
observe what's really going on. And now,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody's autonomous, but you have chaos and people don't get their food.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how their structure works where they kind of do have middle management, if it were, where their responsibility is to coordinate the efforts of everybody, make sure and that they don't if they start cooking, then they lose it, and with that, leaders need to be in a position of leadership. Sometimes I think the higher ups may take a position of, well, but they can also do work too. And then, sure, they can do the job really well, but it creates a lack of oversight
Yeah.
because you can't have 100% autonomy. That's one thing for sure.
Yeah, and it's quite a weight on people's shoulders. I mean, it's one of those things during the I suppose the 80s and the 90s. There was this drive to get rid of these middle managers, all these pen pushers, that are just what are they doing? They're just sitting in their office all day. And
Mhm.
I'm sure some of that was there. I'm sure there were some
Sure.
people that were,
Absolutely.
you know, on the gravy train and didn't want to get off. But what then happens is that somebody's got to do those jobs, or at least some of those jobs. And so who's going to end up doing them? Not the senior team, but
Yeah.
it's the people below that now end up picking up that slack. And so they're now being expected to do things that they didn't need to do before. And again, without the training, sometimes without the support. So yeah, that is a problem. I think also there's a sort we go back to our horses for courses here, but
Yeah.
there's an element of the right skills for the right job. In the UK, I've mentioned the health service already, but it is our biggest employer in the UK by a long way. The health service employs the more people than any other employer, and we have a national health service, so we all pay into it in theory through national insurance, but it's free at the point of use, so we don't have to pay for treatment. Um, there is a private sector, but the majority of people have treatment free at the point of use. Um, and there's been government after government that's restructured it, and it's a huge behemoth of an organisation. But one of the areas where one of the governments changed things quite radically was with the general practitioners, the GPs. The GPs are the doctors, your family doctor essentially. You go to and you tell them about your ailment, and they then will either prescribe some treatment, or they might refer you to the hospital or to a specialist. So they're essentially, in that sense, a triage service, but they're also able to, do some practice, some medicine as well. So that's the idea. Now, there were always managers of these practices. So the managers would look after the finances and would, because you have to pay internal payment processes for paying for services and paying for operations and consultants and so on. So
Mhm.
all this happened internally. And one of the initiatives that one of the governments put in place was essentially to get rid of all these people that were doing that. So we don't need the accountants, we don't need the people who buy the services that do all that. We're going to let the GPs, who are the people that really make all the clinical decisions, we're going to let them do that. And that sounded great to lots of people. Instead of paying all these pen pushers lots of money to manage things, let's give the power to the doctors, to the people that really matter.
Yeah.
But my first, and it hasn't been particularly successful, because my first response to that was, well, if you're a good doctor, does that make you a good manager of the practice? And I would suggest not. I
Yeah.
want people who know what they're doing to do the procurement and the
Mhm.
buying of services and the accounting. And I want doctors to be concentrating on what they do best, which is
Yes.
healing people and referring them. So yeah, that's another problem with this is you end up with the wrong people actually doing the wrong
Mhm.
jobs.
Yeah, it almost I've seen it so many times when you allow too much autonomy, then you lose your organizational alignment.
Yeah,
If you're trying to accomplish a certain goal or wherever the company is wanting to go, you got to have you got to have direction, and you have to have the people that are sailing the ship. They have to know where they're going, and everybody has their place on that ship. Whether it's changing the mast or changing the keel or whatever it is. You have to do those things.
yeah, and I suppose it's not that. Um, it's not necessarily about a hierarchy. So a
Mhm.
well-paid doctor um, have their own seniority, and they have complete control over the clinical decisions.
Mhm.
Um, but a manager of the practice has autonomy over the procurement decisions, or at least some autonomy, or they have control over the procurement decisions and the way that the business is run or the organization is run. So it's not that anybody is feeling um, put upon or under some sort of unfair power structure. It's just that people are doing the roles that they are best suited to do and
Yeah.
making decisions, life or death decisions from the doctor's perspective, financial decisions from the manager's perspective. For me, that's the perfect scenario, and everybody
Mhm.
feels like they are valued, and because they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Maybe not a change of direction, but have
Mm.
you ever heard of the book "The Servant as Leader" by Robert Greenleaf?
Yeah, I know that's quite a big thing, or it has been a big thing, servant leadership. Yeah, tell us about that, Jared.
Well, I think I guess they call it a classic work. I was looking at it the other day, but um, it kind of I don't know. It depends on what the organization is when you develop that mentality, because I think you can wear yourself out if you're trying to be the servant. I just said
Yes.
earlier you can't be cooking on the grill and also managing the restaurant.
Mm,
But his idea was true leadership is about empowering people that follow.
mm,
So I think there's some benefit to that. One of the things that I thought about was the fact that you want leaders should make more leaders, right? I mean, that's one of the identifying characteristics of a good leader is that
yeah.
other people underneath them become leaders. But that servant mindset, I think that takes the into account like your day to day interactions, your decision making. It it You have to be ethical. Maybe that's the right ethical use of your power and your authority that you have, and again, a balance like we've been talking about before. But it was just an interesting take on things because it almost goes against some of the philosophies we have in business,
It's
where,
a very striking idea, isn't it?
yeah,
I think that's one of the reasons that it's leadership and management, the industry of training and coaching is always looking for the next shiny thing, isn't it?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think servant leadership sounds a bit like that. I have to confess, I haven't read that book, and so I'm probably just assuming I know what it means. But
you
yeah,
don't have to read it. It's a boring read. No,
is it? Well, thanks for the tip. Yeah, but I suppose that
just a different point of view.
that concept, actually, if you think about it, it sounds radical, but it's been around a long time. In the UK, our politicians, when they have a job, they're called ministers. So we have the prime minister, we have the health minister, we have foreign secretary, but these are ministers
Hmm.
who, and I mean, the word to minister means to serve, and kings were supposed to be serving their people. Actually, that was what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
Reality very different, clearly, but yeah, there's always, I think, been this tension with being in charge. Actually, means that you're there for the benefit of the people. You're there for the benefit of the people that follow you, and
that's
so
right.
I like that concept. I think it's not a trendy new thing. It's actually always been there. The
Yeah,
problem is when you find yourself in those positions of authority, it's easy for people to forget that. So ministers still think they're really important, and don't often see themselves, I think, as servants of the people, which is actually what they should be.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it made me think about. I don't know if you ever saw this movie. It's called We Were Soldiers. It had Mel Gibson in it.
no, not
He
seen that
was
one.
so he was a he was representing I think he was a colonel or a captain or a general. I apologize because I don't know his rank, but he was in Vietnam and he
Okay.
was leading a bunch of troops through the air cavalry. And you know those images, the stereotypical image of jumping off the helicopter.
Yeah.
And his whole mantra is, "I'll be the first one to put my boots on the ground, and I'll be the
Mm,
last one when we leave." And so he kind of showed that what I think of when I hear servant leadership was he wasn't commanding his troops to do something. He was there in the midst of the battle with them and
mm,
taking the lead. And maybe that's where it goes to our example when it shows if we're truly giving people that empowerment, we have to show them what that looks like. That lead by example is so critical, and not just saying, "Hey, go do this," and tell me
yeah.
how.
There's definitely an element of people like to see that. They like to see. I try to avoid the military metaphors. I'm really trying to find
Okay.
new metaphors, but I'm
Yeah.
going to use one. And they like to see the leader in the trenches. I think
Right.
that is something that I think people do appreciate. But I mean, going back to the servant um, perspective, if you think about it this way, as a leader, what do I need to provide for my team for them to deliver?
Mhm.
I always say to my learners, if you think about it, as a leader and a manager, your success, the degree to which you are a success, is completely dependent upon the people in your team. So
Mhm.
just think about that for a minute.
Mhm.
Your success is completely dependent upon how they perform.
100%.
So anything that you're doing that isn't helping them perform is a waste of your time. So
Mhm.
the next question logically is, what do I need to do then to help them perform? And so in that sense, then that's a really healthy and a useful way to think of yourself, that I'm actually here to facilitate their performance.
Mhm.
And that's why things like having conversations with your team members, supporting them when they've got a problem, listening to their problems, asking them questions, putting the metaphorical arm around the shoulder, those sorts of things, having team meetings where you discuss your vision and what you want to accomplish and how well we're doing, and giving praise and also
Mhm.
highlighting issues. These things that are not necessarily directly related to getting the task done today, but they're so important because they're the things that will ensure that your team help deliver for you. So, yeah, I think servant leadership is a good concept if we think about it in the terms of what do I need to do in order to help my team deliver? Because that's
Yeah.
basically how I'm going to deliver.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That the recognition and rewarding individuals for their contributions is important. It's not just saying a monetary reward, but
Mm.
thinking about how individuals. And I think it's important to focus on the individual too, because sometimes you do the team recognition, and what do they say? 80% of the work's done by 20% of the individuals.
Pareto there again. Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Pareto.
Yeah,
But I mean, regardless of what the real ratio is, it's like you want to make sure that the credit is given where credit is due,
absolutely.
and recognition can go a long way to empower people further. It's not just a paycheck, because I think everybody gets a paycheck, so never say, "Well, your thank you is your paycheck." I'm like, to me, that's like whatever,
Yeah,
because we're all getting paid. But
yeah,
you have to do more than that. But it can come in various forms. One of the things that I like is public praise.
mm,
In going up the chain, saying, "Hey, I just wanted you to know so and so did this and it was awesome," or however
yeah,
you'd like to do it. On
yeah,
the other side of that, one of the things that happens, that old adage is like, the better you do your job, the more responsibility you get. and,
yeah. That's true.
and but you could reward with like things that maybe they'd like to do.
Mm,
Find out who. I guess delegate wisely. Give people things that actually they're strong at that,
yeah.
instead of, I call it a punishment if you give somebody something to do and that's not in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to throw in here before we finish, because we're coming
Yeah,
close to our hour now. I mean, we don't have to stick to an hour, but I feel like an hour is probably the right amount of time
I
for
like
people.
it. I like it. I'm
Yeah,
running
it
out of
seems to
coffee
work.
anyway, so.
But I thought I'd throw in French and Raven's power bases. It seems like it's silly to talk about empowerment and power and authority without just mentioning the most sort of well-known model here, which is French and Raven's power bases. And I was thinking of this when you were talking that. Um, so according to French and Raven, um, depending on when you look at their work, but there's 5 or 6 different types of power. There's legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, referent power, and expert power.
Mhm.
And in the normal sort of leadership hierarchy, this is known as legitimate power. So I've been given the job to be your manager. That power's been um, given to me. I've got some authority now, and most people accept that. It's socially understood, and we generally think, well, yeah, our manager has got the job to give us jobs to do and to check up on our work and stuff like that. So that's legitimate power. It's given legitimacy by whoever it is that's given them that role. So I think most people accept that, but what's nice about the power bases is that there are other power bases that are available to people and to us as well as leaders and managers. So there's reference power, for instance, and reference power is related to liking essentially the person. And so when you like somebody, when you appreciate them, you think they're a good person, or you admire them because of their qualities, that in itself gives some power to that individual. So
Mhm.
there's power available for everybody. It doesn't have to be that same type of power. Expert power is another good example, where there might be people in your team who, because of their knowledge, experience, and expertise, that gives them some power. So um, power can be shared around a bit, and
Mhm.
actually, good organisations are. ones where that power is shared around. So yes, okay, one person in the team has got that legitimate power, but then there's other people who are experts, and there's people who have referent power,
Mhm.
um, and actually that's a really healthy way of a team working. Um, when we think about unorthodox and damaging types of organizations
Mhm.
that behave badly, that have very abusive types of power structures, often what's happening there is that all of the power is being held by the leader. They're essentially monopolizing power within that organization. So that's another thing to think about: is how can we provide a sense of value and importance and power for people in different ways, which I think is quite a nice way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, I really love that. That's good. I'm going to have to read about that because that's something new in
Okay.
my
French
experience.
French and Ravens power bases. I'll pop again. I'll try and find a link. It's quite an old one. I think. Middle of the 20th century that was around. So it's been around quite a long time. And they came up with
Yeah.
another one. I can't remember it off the top of my head now. I've forgotten it. But there's variations on the theme, but it is quite useful. It's quite an interesting one to think
Mhm.
about.
Yeah. No, it's always good. I think we keep mentioning the balance, but at the end of the day, I think empowerment is so critical.
Yeah,
But you have to balance it with also your role as leader. That you have to give people clear objectives, and you do have to manage, and there has to be a degree of control. But just don't be a dictator, and,
exactly.
don't
Well,
don't be a free spirit that's like, hey, whatever, just do whatever you want.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we kind of come full circle, because that's sort of again back to Lewin's three
Hmm.
leadership styles, really, and there are others, but they all sort of align to a similar sort of thing. Yeah, either extreme's bad. There's a zone in the middle that's where you need to be, and then it's situational. You've got some variations depending on the person and the situation.
Sure. Well, it's been a
Good.
good
Well,
discussion, huh?
that was interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jared. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So, if you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We've got a nice steady increase of subscribers on the channel, so that's great. Um, I've had a particularly busy week this week, and last week I was off sick. I had COVID, so I was a little bit late in putting this week's podcast out. So I'm going to try and do it religiously every Thursday or every other Thursday. So that's when it should drop in your inbox. In the meantime, I do little short things on the Instagram, as does Jared on his
Yes.
Instagram. So follow him as well, because he's got lots of little words of wisdom pretty much every day, isn't it?
Try to do it every day. Did one this morning before
Brilliant.
before we recorded, so check it
Brilliant.
out.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jared. Great to speak to you.
Absolutely. Likewise.